Hey guys, it's Mike here, and welcome to LSM at the Movies, a show which originally started on Laughingstock Media and is now re-debuting on Laughingstock Cinema. And in this show, myself and guests will be talking about news related to movies, our general thoughts on movies and franchises, and even shows on occasion. So today we are going to be discussing the Alien franchise, basically where it kind of is right now, the quality of the franchise overall, and where it's really going to be going in the future. So to join me today is someone who is another really big fan of the Alien franchise like myself, and his name is...
Hey guys, what's up? It's Josh from Dragon Ball Nation here.
Okay, so Josh, today we are going to be kind of breaking it down, and there are going to be some spoilers about the most recent Alien movie, and I guess all of them technically. You know, a lot of these movies have been out for years, but we're going to be talking about them kind of in detail. So let's start off first with the original run of the Alien movies. What do you feel about those movies overall, Josh?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think most people agree that the first two, Alien and Aliens, are masterpieces. There's definitely love out there for Alien 3. I know both of us, we seem to like it more each time we watch it.
Yeah.
You know, it's definitely, I feel like, underrated in terms of the fan base, but I don't really put it to anywhere near the same quality as the first two films. But, you know, if you watch the assembly cut, a lot of the additional scenes in there and changes do make the movie better. Some of them do make it worse, in my opinion. But, you know, if we move on to Alien Resurrection, I mean, I don't even think the movie's really fun to watch. It's so stupid. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
Especially the shot where Ripley does the back shot with the basketball. She just throws it behind her. It's like, what was the point of that? That made no...
I wonder how many takes that scene took.
Right. No, it took just one, apparently.
Wow.
That's what I heard, at least. But, you know, I don't have the source for that. But what I understand, it only took one take for that, which I guess is impressive in itself. But, you know, the third movie, I guess even Aliens, you know, you could say, after the first movie, I think the movies really just dropped the horror aspect. Although, you know, looking at behind-the-scenes stuff with James Cameron, it seemed like he did want to preserve that horror in there, and, you know, the suspense and tension, which the movie definitely has. Maybe not so much horror, but, you know, looking back on those films right now, Aliens, especially after Alien Resurrection and AVP and stuff like that, Alien isn't scary anymore. And I don't know if they ever could be scary again in films, in my opinion. Like, Alien 3 definitely tried to have that horror there. Mm-hmm. It didn't work, in my opinion. Even looking at it now, even though I don't think that movie is scary and, you know, it doesn't make me suspenseful, even if I were to see that today as an adult for the first time, I wouldn't think that movie would be very suspenseful or thrilling in that sense. Yeah. And definitely not Resurrection. That's just an action movie straight up. There is no horror. There's so many scenes you can point at where, the one guy that has the chest burster in him, grabs the other guy's head and has the chest burster come out of the one guy's head, and it's just like there's just scenes like that are just so stupid and just B-movie-esque, and they just didn't hit the quality of the first two films. You know, Ridley Scott's original, upon multiple viewings, I find it is a little more, I guess, difficult to go back to with the beginning parts, because it's something that we've seen multiple times with the world building and setting up the universe. Yeah, it seems unnecessary to view those portions again, like the first maybe 40 or 35 minutes,
especially with the extended edition.
Right. And with Aliens, that's more digestible to watch over and over. There's more going on, and there's less silence, I guess. Yeah. Which, I'm not saying the silence in the movie is a bad thing for the first one. It's just one of those things where upon multiple viewings, you start to notice that it's a little unnecessary for you to revisit that part specifically of the film.
And the original one is also, with that, kind of a product of its time, because, you know, that came out in the 70s, and a lot of the 60s and 70s science fiction movies were more like slow, monotonous, very little background music, or, you know, like, let's look at 2001 is a great example of a great science fiction movie.
Probably the best thing to compare it to.
And at the same time, it's also really, like, slow. You know, a lot of people nowadays hate the movie because it's just so slow and it takes so long to get where it's going. But at the same time, that's part of the point of the movie, because it's kind of about evolution and, you know, the further evolution of man. So it makes sense that it's a slow process to finally get where you are. But in Alien, it's kind of like the evil opposite version of 2001, where instead of finding something that'll make humanity better, they go and they find this horrible weapon that will just destroy every single living thing that it could possibly touch, you know? So it's more like finding the Pandora's box as opposed to finding like the tree of life.
And I like how you called it a weapon, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, and the importance of that, because that's something interesting to see how Ridley Scott thinks of the xenomorph creature itself. He looks at it very differently than other people that have approached the films before. You know, I don't know if he had the idea of the alien queen or not, but, you know, obviously James Cameron had that in his film. With the second film too, I just want to touch on, that one also gets a lot of praise, obviously, but I feel like some people don't like the first one because it's slow. I've heard that, at least, you know, in comparisons to Covenant, which we'll get into later, people don't like the slower nature of the first film, I guess. But even with Aliens, you know, especially if you watch the extended cut, it takes about a good 50 minutes to an hour to see a xenomorph like attack, aside from where you see like Newt's family get attacked and stuff, or, you know, have that encounter with the aliens.
And I'm not entirely sure why it is that goes by so much quicker, because I watched all of the Alien movies recently in like a week, you know, like back to back. And, you know, for some reason, even though Aliens, especially the extended version, is pretty much around the same length as the original, it just doesn't feel like it takes as long. I think it's because a lot of that time is more devoted to fleshing out the characters, you know, Ripley
That's
deciding
exactly
if she wants to come back instead of like basically being forced to go into this thing, you know, even though they did do somewhat of a good job in the original one, kind of fleshing out like who these people are. Aliens did a much better job, I feel like, because a lot of the characters are a lot more like defined, you know, especially the colonial marines they go in with. Just so many great characters in the second movie.
Right, and with the second one, like you said, it fleshes things out. There's just a lot more going on, and there's stuff that you can pick up on each time you watch the movie again, or maybe you didn't notice something that you pick up again with Aliens. With the first one, I feel like, you know, getting to the planet and everything, I feel like there just isn't as much stuff to catch on multiple viewings. There's not as much new stuff to pick up on in the earlier parts. That's just how I feel about it.
Yeah, absolutely. The original one, I feel like, is a little bit more straightforward, whereas with Aliens, there's other subplots going on. And then you get into Alien 3, and there's a lot of stuff going on there.
Right, and you can definitely pick out stuff throughout that film that you might enjoy more the more you see it. Little things with the cinematography, how they represent some scenes. Like in the assembly cut, I believe, is when it's coming out of the ox, and there's this whole scene where it's doing two different scenes at once, kind of like the birth of the aliens, kind of like this religious kind of thing is how they're representing it. And I liked that. I don't remember if that was in the original version, because I haven't seen the original version in a while, because I just like the assembly cut so much more.
Yeah.
And with Alien Resurrection, I can't think of anything that I like when I see it over and over. I think I just find more that I dislike about it. I try to avoid watching as much as possible.
Yeah, I haven't seen Alien Resurrection for a while until I saw it this past time, and I guess I just hate it the more I watch it. Like, I picked up on so many more things I didn't like this time around than I did last time. It's just, I just can't stand it. But Alien 3 is a movie that I pretty much liked ever since I saw it. Even the original theatrical cut of the movie, I always liked it. Like, I thought it was pretty well done in some ways, you know. I didn't think it was anywhere near as good as 1 and 2. But, you know, one of the biggest things, of course, comes down to the fact that they start the movie by killing off the survivors, aside from Ripley, from Aliens. And that was one of the big things that I really didn't like, that I might kind of touch upon in our Alien Covenant, you know, discussion that we're going to have shortly. But I feel like overall it's still a good movie, and the quality kind of drops from there, like even more dramatically than it dropped from like 2 to 3.
Especially because we get the introduction of some CGI scenes, and some of the stop motion puppetry work that they did didn't look very good either. But there's definitely some scenes where it looks dated now in a lot of scenes, and that's something that you don't really get with the original 2 films, in my opinion. Aside from in the first one, obviously, when the alien goes out of the airlock, that looks pretty bad. But that movie, just the xenomorph looks so incredible. The whole set, nothing about it ages to me. It's just a very pristine looking film, and it's something that just won't look bad, in my opinion.
Yeah, it was really well done. And
everything's tangible.
Yeah, absolutely. And nowadays you have a lot more CGI, but let's get into, I guess, the current state of the Alien franchise, I guess starting with Prometheus, because obviously Prometheus and Alien Covenant represent like a different direction it's gone in. Ridley Scott once again coming back to the Alien franchise after not really touching it since the original one, and pretty much now instituting his own idea and his own vision of what everything is going to lead into and build up to and kind of represent as a whole. Now, I think you and I both actually like this movie, isn't that right, Prometheus?
I do, and it's one of those movies, again, where I like it more every time. Not so much that I notice more things I like about it, it's because I understand the film more every time. There's a lot of hidden details that you need to look at with that film.
And like a lot of Ridley Scott movies, the extended edition is better in a lot of ways because they answer a lot more questions than the theatrical cut does. However, at the same time, one of the things that Prometheus and Alien Covenant have kind of done is that they've created more mystery and further questions about the Alien universe because, after Alien Resurrection, what else really was there to ask aside from where did these things come from and who created them and why? And I feel like that was one of the biggest attributes of Prometheus, that they actually decided to delve into that question and kind of explore these engineer characters. Now, what do you think overall about Prometheus? Because obviously, the movie does have some flaws. Like, it's not a perfect movie by any means. And a lot of people have kind of found this movie polarizing. Some people hate it, but I think that, for me at least, there's a lot of redeeming qualities that make the movie more interesting.
Well, I think people just look at it the wrong way. It's not, it really isn't an alien film. That's why it doesn't even have alien in the name. Unless you want to count the deacon at the end, there isn't even a xenomorph in the film. And, I thought that was just fan service, but that was actually put there for, a specific reason. There's this large, need to have a big world building, really, is what Ridley Scott's doing. He's making the universe. He's actually creating it. You could argue that the comic books have expanded on this stuff as well, but in his mind, this is his universe for Alien. Is he going to do Alien Queens? Who knows? Maybe. What's he going to do with the xenomorphs in later films? We don't really know that yet because he has this idea to build a big universe, and that's what the point of Prometheus was to be the first film to start that, really, to build this bigger world, like an extended Star Wars universe or something like that you can compare it to. And that's what I think people don't like about Prometheus, because it doesn't have that much on the surface in common with the other Alien films. Also, there might be people that just don't like that there's not a lot of action in it, I guess you could say. It's a slow movie. It doesn't seem to have a lot of ties on the surface with Alien, and a lot of people were just confused by it. And a lot of people, this is the same with Covenant, point out their problems they have with the movie, but their problems don't ring so true when the things they have problems with are either resolved or answered in the film itself. But there's minor nitpicks you can still make because there's definitely some problems with this film. But overall, I just feel like as the first step into making a bigger universe, I think it was well done. But I can understand why people wouldn't like it because, if they're looking for an Alien movie, they're not going to get it here necessarily. But there's definitely ties to the franchise for sure. And it's a very good prequel to the whole series.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's just a lot of good things about Prometheus and a lot of really interesting components that have allowed it to become more resonant with people and fans of the Alien franchise. And obviously, that's why they decided to go further on and create Alien Covenant. However, with Prometheus, I feel like one of the biggest pluses and benefits of the movie is all the ways it's different from the Alien movies, how it's actually becoming more of its own story about the engineers, how they created humanity, and as well as basically created the xenomorphs, or this kind of artificial weapon that would be able to bond with things on a biological level and kind of destroy everything in sight, which really leads a lot more into Alien Covenant, where they get a lot more into the aspects of the weapon itself, the black goo basically, and the effects that it has on the world, rather than basically why are we here. And a lot of it also kind of focuses more on a character who was first introduced in the Prometheus movie, who was my favorite part of the Prometheus movie in terms of an actor, and that is David, played by Michael Fassbender. And, I think you and I both really like his character in this franchise, right?
Oh, definitely, for sure. Especially for just being an android, obviously he's an older model, so he has these features about him that can let him do more decision making and be individual, I suppose. And I think that lends itself a lot to making him a pretty interesting and, I should say, a character with a lot of depth. But in reality, there is still some simplicity to him. But at the same time, it's kind of like we don't fully understand his intentions all the time either. Like in Alien Covenant, where he dropped the goo on what looked like engineers. It might have actually been like another race of beings that the engineers maybe created, or a different subspecies of engineers. We don't fully understand that part.
Yeah.
At least I have. Maybe there's some stuff in the novelization that I've missed. But, why exactly did he drop that on there? You can speculate. I know that the Blu-ray is explaining a lot of stuff, but I haven't gotten to catch that. But apparently it has a lot of new stuff that does add detail to the story. But, a lot of his motivations are also detailed even further there. But, there's something about him.
Yeah.
He's just interesting, especially in Prometheus when he's, dipping his finger into the glass of water. So the guy drinks it and, just because he could, really. Or to test the effects of it.
Yeah, so that he could experiment with it. Because a lot of the original Prometheus movie is that Mr. Wayland actually wants to basically become immortal. That's kind of like one of the biggest reasons why they have the expedition to go to the Engineer planet, which ends up being a weapons manufacturing planet. Not sure why they told us to go there. Maybe all the cave paintings were saying, don't go here. But one of the big interesting things that David says in Prometheus is, don't all children hate their fathers? And they kind of expanded upon that in the next movie, in Alien Covenant, when we see that original scene of, I guess, the creation of David with Mr. Wayland back when he was a little bit younger. And I guess that David is asking him different questions, and eventually Mr. Wayland just becomes annoyed by the whole situation, kind of like has David just do his bidding. So I feel like maybe that scene is what kind of set up his whole resentment of Wayland and I guess humanity as a whole, and now rather would try and use humans as like an experimenting ground for his creation, which, Josh, this is definitely one of the most polarizing aspects of Alien Covenant, but it appears that David used the black goo and the engineer's technology to kind of create the xenomorphs, or to create, something that would go on to become the xenomorphs and further the impact of the weapon.
It's kind of like he's replicating the xenomorph design, because there were carvings on the walls of Prometheus that kind of depicted, I guess, Giger-esque designs, things that looked like they may have resembled facehuggers and xenomorphs, stuff like that. But, it looks like David is, obviously he made the creatures that are in Covenant. Maybe he altered the spores to have that backburster come out of that guy and turn into the neomorph or protomorph, whichever one's which again. But he did, create the one that had the actual egg hatch that did resemble mostly a xenomorph, although it's not fully a xenomorph yet. Whether that's the creature that the engineers had or not, I don't know. But what I understand is that he's replicating that design that they had already made, and he's going to make it the perfect organism, his masterpiece and all that stuff. So I think that's cool, because it makes so David does make the xenomorphs, but at the same time they also have a rich history being these ancient beings. Really, they are these ancient creatures that have existed for a long time, and he's really just trying to perfect the organism, an organism that still is doesn't like fire. Nothing likes fire though.
And the interesting part about David too is that whereas all the human characters in the movies, and I guess a lot of the audience, is always trying to figure out why all this stuff is happening, David is more of a character who doesn't care why. He just wants to do his own things. So, they get
just because he can. He's curious. That's basically all it is.
Yeah. They get to the planet originally, and he just drops the vials of the black goo on everyone. And as we see in the YouTube clips, which is one of the things I dislike about this movie, that they didn't put him in the actual movie, but in one of the YouTube clips before he does this, he puts Elizabeth Shaw into cryostasis before he even does this. So, he basically takes everything into his own hands and just wipes them all out without actually wanting to know a lot of why this is happening. He doesn't really care. It's irrelevant to him. Whereas for humans, they have true emotion, and they have more questions of the spirit, but he's an android. He doesn't care about the spirit.
I like to think that with David, ever since, he asked, why do you think I was created? Holloway said, because we could. I like to think that he took that to heart and kind of used that as an ideology to represent a lot of things he does. Like, why did he drop the bioweapons on that race of beings, if that's engineers or not? Who knows? Because he could. Maybe there's a deeper meaning to it, but I like to think of it in simpler terms like that. Why is he creating life? because he's curious and because he can. You know, he doesn't really care about the ramifications of things.
I mean, I do wish that they had not necessarily killed them off immediately, because as a viewer, I do kind of want to know some of these things. I want to know whose planet that is. Are they actually the engineers? You know, I don't want to have to
Yeah, they might not even be on the engineer homeworld or anything like what we thought they were going to do in the next movie after Prometheus. They could be somewhere else.
So that was definitely one of the kind of, I guess, flaws I had with the movie, of something I really didn't like when it happened. But, you know, I know, Josh, you tend to like this movie even more than I do. So I feel like, you know, that to you might not be as big of a thing. But the ending, I feel like, for both of us, might be one of the coolest parts of the movie, where we have this really interesting twist where David and Walter, the other robot, they kind of have a fight, and it seems like Walter is a more advanced model than David, I guess, that doesn't really have the same limitations that he calls them of decision making, and he seems to kill David and join with the team again. However, at the end, we discovered that this robot is in fact David, and he actually put the lead captain into cryostasis, and he then basically pukes up these alien embryos, these xenomorph looking embryos or face huggers, I guess, and now he has an entire station full of people that he could basically experiment on.
Right. Well, what really made that for me, and you know, Ridley Scott said that you're supposed to actually catch the twist beforehand.
Yeah, I did.
I didn't, and I kind of feel dumb about it, but you know what? I think that made me enjoy that a little bit more because it did catch me off guard, even though it wasn't supposed to. But what really made it for me was the actual reveal of it for me was when they're talking about the log cabin and he doesn't understand.
Yeah.
And then he says, "Don't let the bed bugs bite." I thought I love that scene.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, I'll do the fingering. People think it's supposed to be unintentionally funny, but it was supposed to be there for humor.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be there.
That whole scene was really interesting to me, but it did seem kind of sexual in a lot of ways.
Oh, it was supposed to be. It was intentionally supposed to be like that. I don't know if that really necessarily fits in the movie, but it definitely gave me a laugh for sure.
I mean, would that be sex or masturbation? That's one of the things I have to know.
But, you know, one of the negatives about the movie for me is the CGI for the aliens. Did not care for it. I don't think it looked as bad as some people say, but, you know, there's definitely a lack of practical effects. Although the sets and all that stuff, all of the environments they traverse through are beautiful. The actual CGI is just a disappointment. I figured we were going to get some practical effects. Even in the trailers, I didn't think it looked like it was fully CGI. It looked like there were some suits involved. Kind of like what they did with
The Thing?
Well, I was going to say Shin and Godzilla. With The Thing, I think the studio might have gotten rid of the practical effects towards the end, I believe is what happened, but I don't remember. I only paid attention to that movie once. But yeah, with this, you know, it's something that can look dated in years. That's the problem with it. It's not going to be like the first two movies where they're not going to look dated, in my opinion.
I mean, that's one of the problems with CGI in general.
Right. They hasn't been perfected.
Yeah, it's like playing a video game, you know, from 10 years ago versus playing a AAA video game from now.
Well, unless you're playing Crysis.
Well, that's true, I guess. But with all this being said, this leads into, I guess, the biggest thing that we have to talk about, which is the future of the Alien franchise. Where do you think this is all really going to go, Josh? Like, where do you think that they're really building everything to?
Well, I heard Ridley Scott say he'd like to do a movie a year. I mean, if they can consistently be good, I have no problems with that.
Yeah, but these movies took, how many years? How many years ago did Prometheus come out? 5 years ago?
2012. So, yeah, you know, it probably took a good 3, maybe even 4 years to actually get this movie developed and finished. But I want to see it all come full circle to the first film. As to what the next film's going to be exactly, I don't know myself as, you know, just a moviegoer that's not going to try to look up all the spoilers and all the leaked scripts and all that stuff of any of the films, although I will end up seeing that stuff eventually, I'm sure. I would like to see the engineers have something else. You know, I'm sure there's more engineers out there if, you know, again, falling back on the fact that were those actually the engineers that he had killed? Was it a different race of beings? Was it a subspecies of engineers? Are there more out there? Who knows? Maybe the engineers can be mad at David for what he had done. And it sounds stupid, but maybe some sort of an engineer and xenomorph kind of battle. You know, it would be more actiony, obviously. It kind of sounds silly, but you know what? If it's done right, it could work. Then you could have scenes where apparently in the original, in Prometheus, there was supposed to be an actual engineer xenomorph, not the Deacon at the end, but something very very big 15-foot tall monster. At least that's what I heard. It'd be cool to see that kind of an idea visited in an actual film instead of just a scrapped concept.
It does seem like there's a history of that happening. Like in Alien Resurrection, if I remember correctly, the final alien that came out of the Queen was originally...
The newborn?
Yeah, was originally going to be like a giant white spider xenomorph.
Oh, God.
So
I didn't know that.
That would have certainly been really interesting to see, but
that would have certainly been not good.
It would have been. It would have been better than everything else we got in the movie, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. As long as the spider didn't look like it was gonna cry when it saw Ripley, as long as it still gets sucked out of that break in the hall. That was a cool scene in the movie, I'll admit, in Alien Resurrection, where the newborn alien gets killed. That looked very good.
Yeah, especially the scene where all of the skin gets sucked off the skull and the skull just like shatters.
But I just want to see the whole series go full circle to the first movie. I don't know if I necessarily want to see anything after that, like how there was going to be that Alien 5. I don't know if I really would have needed that specifically for that story to continue with Ripley.
I mean, that would have been basically like a reboot of
Pretend third, because it's supposed to be after the second movie, I believe.
Yeah, it's basically ignore the third and onward.
I wouldn't have a problem if you ignored the fourth one, but well, then I'd have to clone her again if they kept the third one there. But no, I'd like Covenant, maybe after the next film, whatever it is. I want to see these, because he's obviously going to be experimenting more. He's going to have it perfected by time they're landing at their destination. I'd like to think the destination they're originally going to and that it is going to in the film that also has a sustainable planet for life is LV-426 from the first and second movie. That's what I'd like to see. And, that would show how all those xenomorph eggs got there and everything.
I think it'd be really interesting if they get to the planet and the planet is actually like totally habitable, like it's a paradise basically. And then the LV-426 that we actually see in the original Alien movies is just like the destroyed version.
So it has been through years of just destruction and manipulation. It's died as a planet for the most part, at least. But the thing is, I believe the first Alien movie takes place a few years after Covenant, I think. So, there isn't actually a whole lot of time to really have a lot of crazy things happen.
Yeah, but then again, we talk about a show half the time where like a million things happen in the course of 10 years. So
right.
I don't think it's impossible. But overall, I feel like, there's certainly still things they can do with this franchise, and I'm interested to see where it's going. I know there's a lot of fans who just, have been kind of jumping off ever since Prometheus and Alien Covenant, but, I'm still kind of interested to see where all of this goes. How far does the rabbit hole lead, basically? So I think that there's still some really interesting things they could do. I've seen much worse movies in the past, too, and, I guess Ridley's already got my money.
I want to say one thing, Mike, because I saw it on Twitter, and I've heard it on the internet, is a lot of people didn't like Covenant because they thought it didn't have enough action. That movie had more action than I would say all the other films besides Resurrection.
That movie had too much action, if anything.
Yeah. Aliens didn't have as much action as you might remember if you haven't seen it in recent years. Doesn't have as much action as you think it does. Definitely not the first movie and not Alien 3. This has plenty of action and it looks good aside from, some of the awkward CGI moments. But the action is fun in this movie. So I just didn't understand that criticism.
Probably also the goriest one out of all the movies, too, which is saying something, definitely.
They must just be fans of AVP and Requiem. Although I don't hate AVP, but Requiem is just...
I still wouldn't mind if they somehow incorporated the Predator universe into Aliens, because I like the concept of them sharing the same universe. And it would be interesting if we find out, like, the engineers created the xenomorphs in that black goo to fight the Predators, in their advanced warrior civilization or something. Like, maybe they're going to be, like, representative of the fallen angels, whereas the engineers are the good ones. There's always that kind of allegorical, metaphorical stuff going on in these movies. But overall, I think that, the Alien franchise is certainly still in a very interesting position. People are still talking about it. So we're going to have to see where it's going to go in the future. But let us know your own thoughts down below in the comments about what you think about the Alien franchise and about the future of it. I know some people keep saying, they should reboot it, but do we really want that? No, we don't.
No. That'll ruin the whole universe, in my opinion, because it will be a reset. I think Ridley Scott is the best person to direct the series. People think he's going senile. I just think they just don't understand the movies completely. Yes, there's problems, but there's a lot of depth to it, in my opinion.
Yeah. Of course, check out Dragon Ball Nation in the description and the end card. And as I always say, stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.